Missing person reports always came with a certain tension. The faces of concerned loved ones, their voices cracking as they described who they were looking for. I'd handled dozens during my 8 years at Pine Ridge National Park. Tourists who wandered off trails, amateur photographers who got disoriented chasing the perfect sunset shot, even the occasional hiker who deliberately went off-grid. But something felt wrong about this one from the moment they walked in. I'd been updating trail condition reports at my desk when the station door swung open. The couple approached the counter with measured steps. The man did the talking while the woman hung back, her fingers fidgeting with something around her neck. "Our friend went missing on the Aspen Trail about 4 hours ago," the man said. His voice was steady and almost rehearsed. "We've been looking, but we can't find him." I reached for the incident report form. "I'm Senior Ranger Everett, Mark Everett. I'll need some details about your friend." "Jason Miller," the man supplied immediately. 32 years old. He was wearing a red flannel shirt and carrying a black backpack. I jotted this down, watching them carefully. The woman hadn't shed a single tear. The man's hands weren't shaking. 4 hours missing in the wilderness, and they looked like they were reporting a lost wallet. "And your names?" I asked. "Brian Thompson. This is my wife, Sarah." I nodded. "Can you tell me exactly what happened before you lost contact with Jason?" Brian straightened his glasses. "We were hiking the Aspen Trail. Jason wanted to check out something off the path. We told him we'd wait, but after 30 minutes we started looking. We couldn't find him." "You waited 30 minutes before looking?" The question slipped out before I could package it more diplomatically. "Jason likes to explore." Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice soft but not frightened. "We thought he'd come back." I wrote this down, not bothering to hide my skepticism. "Did you call out for him?" "Of course," Brian answered too quickly. "For hours, actually." I glanced at the clock on the wall. If they'd been searching for hours and it took another hour to drive to the station from the Aspen Trailhead, their timeline didn't add up, but I kept my face neutral. "I'll assemble a search team right away," I said, picking up the radio. "The good news is we still have several hours of daylight left." While I called in the other rangers, I watched the Thompsons from the corner of my eye. They weren't conferring anxiously or pacing like most people did. Sarah looked at the park map on the wall, her expression blank. Brian checked his watch. 20 minutes later, Rangers Collins and Ramirez arrived. I briefed them quickly while the Thompsons waited outside. "Something's off about them," I murmured. "Keep your eyes open." We gathered our gear, first aid supplies, extra water, emergency blankets, and radios. As we stepped outside, I approached the couple. "We're ready to head out. You'll need to come with us." Brian's head snapped up. "That's not necessary. We've already shown you on the map where we lost him." "Actually, it is necessary," I countered, keeping my tone professional. "You know Jason. You can identify his belongings, call out to him in a voice he'll recognize. Having you there doubles our chances of finding him quickly." The couple exchanged a look that sent warning signals through my brain. "We're exhausted," Sarah tried. "We've been searching for hours already." "I understand, but the first 24 hours are critical in a situation like this. We have water and energy bars. You can ride with me to the trailhead." For a moment, I thought Brian might refuse outright, but something in my expression must have told him this wasn't negotiable. "Fine," he muttered. In my truck, the tension was obvious. I asked standard questions: Jason's physical condition, medical issues, outdoor experience, and got clipped answers that painted the picture of a fairly experienced hiker who shouldn't have gotten lost on a moderate trail like Aspen. As we pulled into the trailhead parking lot, I caught movement in my rearview mirror. Sarah leaned toward Brian, her lips moving near his ear. Even with my trained hearing, I barely caught her whisper. What if it worked this time? Brian's hand clamped around her wrist and she fell silent, eyes darting to the back of my head. I pretended not to notice, but the hairs on my neck stood up. Worked. What worked? The Aspen Trail search yielded nothing, just as I expected. We called Jason's name, checked obvious rest spots and viewpoints, and found no sign of disturbance. No discarded water bottle, no footprints veering off trail, no broken branches indicating someone had pushed through the undergrowth. By late afternoon, I made the call. We need to check Devil's Canyon. Collins raised an eyebrow. That's pretty far off the Aspen Loop. Exactly why we need to check it. If Jason went exploring, that might have drawn his attention. I didn't miss how Brian's face paled at the mention of Devil's Canyon. That's impossible, he said. Jason wouldn't go that far off trail. You just told me he likes to explore, I reminded him. And we've cleared the main trail. We need to expand the search area. The terrain grew rougher as we pushed toward the canyon. The trail disappeared, leaving us to navigate by map and compass. With each step, the Thompsons' composure deteriorated. Sarah flinched at every snapping twig. Brian checked his watch compulsively, his breathing growing labored in a way that had nothing to do with the hike's difficulty. Did Jason know about Devil's Canyon? I asked casually. I don't think so, Brian said too quickly. He might have, Sarah contradicted, earning a glare from her husband. We did some reading about the park before coming. I filed that discrepancy away. The canyon has some local legends attached to it. Nothing serious, just old stories about strange occurrences. Probably why it's not on the tourist maps. Sarah's hand went to her throat, clutching what I now saw was some kind of pendant. Not a cross or any religious symbol I recognized, something angular and complex. As daylight began to fade, I called a halt. We'll make camp here and continue at first light. While Collins and Ramirez set up our simple camp, I kept an eye on the Thompsons. They sat apart from us, speaking in hushed tones that stopped whenever I came within earshot. After a tense meal of protein bars and trail mix, everyone settled into their sleeping bags. I volunteered for first watch, positioning myself where I could observe our entire party. Around midnight, I noticed Sarah sitting up, her back against a tree. Her lips moved silently, fingers working over the pendant. Moonlight caught the strange angles of the symbol, making it seem to move and change. I strained to hear her words, expecting prayers for Jason's safety. Instead, what reached my ears sounded like no language I'd ever heard. Guttural sounds interspersed with hisses that made my skin crawl. When she finished, she looked directly at me, as if she'd known I was watching all along. Our eyes locked across the darkened camp, and for a moment, I thought I saw something ancient and calculating in her expression. Then she slipped back into her sleeping bag, leaving me alone with the uneasy feeling that we weren't searching for a missing hiker anymore. We were hunting for something much worse. The rest of the night passed without incident, but sleep evaded me. I kept replaying Sarah's strange midnight ritual in my mind, those inhuman sounds she'd made, the calculating look in her eyes when she caught me watching. By the time dawn broke through the trees, I'd convinced myself something far worse than a simple hiking accident had befallen Jason Miller. I roused the camp while checking my satellite phone. No signal, as expected in these depths of the park. We'd need to find Jason today or call in additional resources. Everyone ready to move out? I slung my pack over my shoulders, watching the Thompsons closely. Brian nodded stiffly, his eyes bloodshot from poor sleep. Sarah looked even worse. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and she kept glancing nervously into the surrounding forest. Ranger Collins approached me as we prepared to break camp. You think we'll find anything out here, Mark? We're way off any marked trail. That's exactly why we need to check, I replied, keeping my voice low. People don't just vanish, and these two aren't telling us everything. We moved in formation through the increasingly dense undergrowth. Devil's Canyon wasn't actually a canyon yet at this elevation, more a deepening ravine that would eventually cut between two ridgelines. The forest here grew differently, older, with more shadows beneath ancient pines and twisted oak trees. I took point, machete in hand, to clear occasional brambles, while Collins and Ramirez flanked the Thompsons. Their protective positioning wasn't lost on Brian, whose jaw tightened visibly. Is this really necessary? He asked after an hour of hiking. We've gone well beyond where Jason could have wandered. You'd be surprised how far a disoriented hiker can travel, I said, not breaking stride, especially if they're trying to find their way back to a trail. The truth was, I had no idea where Jason might be, but my instincts screamed that Devil's Canyon held answers, and the Thompsons' growing discomfort only reinforced that belief. The terrain steepened as we descended further into the ravine. Tree roots created natural stairs over rocky outcrops, and the air grew noticeably cooler. I checked my watch, just past 10 a.m., but it felt like late afternoon in the deep shade. "Wait," Ramirez called out suddenly. "I see something." I followed his pointing finger to a splash of black against the brown forest floor about 30 yards ahead. We approached cautiously. A backpack lay torn open beside a perfect circle of stones, its contents scattered wildly as though ransacked by an animal, or something trying to mimic an animal attack. I crouched to examine it, pulling on latex gloves from my kit. "Is this Jason's?" I asked, looking up at the Thompsons. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Brian froze, then nodded mechanically. As I carefully sorted through the scattered items, energy bars with single bites taken out, a water bottle, a torn map, my eye caught something on a nearby tree. Standing, I moved toward it, then stopped cold. Carved into the trunk, about chest height, was a symbol, angular and complex with lines that seemed to bend in impossible ways. It matched the pendant I'd seen Sarah wearing. Similar markings decorated surrounding trees, forming a rough perimeter around the stone circle. "What the hell is this?" I murmured, running my fingers over the carved grooves. They were crusted with a brownish substance that flaked at my touch. Testing a theory, I pulled out my multi-tool and scraped a small sample into an evidence bag. "Dried blood," Collins whispered beside me, having reached the same conclusion. I turned back to the Thompsons. The change in Sarah was immediate and dramatic. Her entire body trembled, eyes wide with unmistakable terror. "Oh God," she whispered. "It worked. It actually worked." Brian grabbed her arm hard enough to make her wince. "Shut up," he hissed. I stepped toward them, evidence bag held up. "I think it's time you told us exactly what's going on here." "Nothing's going on," Brian insisted. "Jason must have been attacked by an animal. We need to keep looking for him." Sarah wrenched her arm free from Brian's grip. "No, we have to tell them. They need to know what they're dealing with." "Sarah, don't." "He's dead," she shrieked, her voice carrying through the canyon. "Jason's dead and it's our fault. We brought it here." Brian lunged for her, but Ramirez intercepted him, firmly restraining his arms. "Take it easy," Ramirez warned. Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. I knelt in front of her, careful to maintain some distance. "What happened to Jason?" I asked, keeping my voice level even with adrenaline flooding my system. Between gut-wrenching sobs, Sarah's story spilled out. "We found this book, an old text. Brian collects occult artifacts. He said it was harmless, just an experience. Temporary possession." "Temporary possession?" I repeated, struggling to process what she was saying. Brian stopped struggling against Ramirez's hold, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "It's not what you think," he said flatly. "The possession lets you experience life without fear of death, just for a while. It's like the ultimate high." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. "You're telling me you came into these woods to perform some kind of demonic ritual?" "Previous attempts failed," Brian continued, his voice taking on a detached academic tone that chilled me more than Sarah's hysteria. "Nothing ever happened. We thought it was harmless, just old superstition. But Jason wanted to try again, here, in this place with the history." "What history?" Collins asked. Brian's eyes flicked to him. "Local indigenous people avoided this canyon, called it the thin place, where the barrier weakens." I felt a crawling sensation along my spine that had nothing to do with the cooling temperature. "And you decided that was a good place for your experiment?" "It was supposed to be temporary," Sarah whimpered. "The entity enters, you feel what it's like on the other side, and then it leaves. That's all. But something went wrong this time." I glanced around at the rangers. Collins looked deeply disturbed while Ramirez maintained his professional demeanor even with the bizarre turn of events. "So what exactly did you do to Jason?" I asked, returning my attention to the Thompsons. "We didn't do anything to him," Brian snapped. "He volunteered. We performed the ritual just like before. The circle, the symbols, the offering." "Offering?" I felt sick. "Just blood," Brian said quickly. "Our own blood. A few drops each from all three of us, that's all." Sarah was rocking back and forth now. "But it came this time," she whispered. "We felt it. The air became thick and oppressive. The symbols started to move. Jason was in the center. It took him. Took him where?" I pressed. "It entered him," she said, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. His eyes turned black. He spoke in a language we'd never heard. Then he just walked away and headed into the forest. Brian tried to follow, but he couldn't move. Neither could I. It was like we were frozen. When we could move again, Jason was gone. I stood up slowly, processing this information. My rational mind wanted to dismiss their story as a psychotic break or a cover for something more mundane. Maybe they'd hurt Jason accidentally and were inventing this fantasy as a defense mechanism. But the evidence around us, the ritual circle, the symbols that match Sarah's pendant, the unnatural feeling of the forest, made it hard to completely reject their account. "We need to find Jason," I said finally. "Whether what you're saying is true or not, he's still missing." "You don't understand," Sarah pleaded. "We can't find him. It has him now." I ignored her protest. "We're continuing the search. Collins, bag anything that might be evidence. Ramirez, keep an eye on them." As we prepared to move deeper into the canyon, I noticed an immediate change in our surroundings. The forest had fallen completely silent. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of wind through leaves. The air felt charged, like the moments before a severe thunderstorm. A wisp of fog curled between the trees ahead, even though the weather forecast I'd checked before departing had been clear. More tendrils followed, rolling along the forest floor and climbing tree trunks like ghostly fingers. Mark?" Collins gestured around us. "This normal for these parts?" "No," I admitted, watching as the temperature display on my watch dropped rapidly. My breath began to fog in front of my face. We pressed on through the thickening mist, staying close together. The ravine narrowed, forcing us into single file. I kept expecting the fog to burn off as the day progressed, but it only grew denser, limiting visibility to about 15 feet in any direction. "There's something ahead," Ramirez called out. I squinted into the white haze. A splash of red hung suspended from a branch, swaying slightly though there was no breeze. My stomach dropped as we approached. Jason's red flannel shirt, torn and soaked with what could only be blood, dripped steadily onto the ground below. The blood looked fresh, too fresh for a shirt that should have been hanging there for over 24 hours. Brian made a choking sound. Sarah fell to her knees again, but this time she wasn't crying. Her hands clutched the pendant at her throat, and she began to rock back and forth, mouth moving rapidly. I leaned closer, straining to hear. "Nixathoth, leave us be. We meant no trespass. Nixathoth, pass us by. We offer no challenge." The words made no sense to me, but the urgency in her whispered chant was unmistakable. A sound rippled through the fog-shrouded forest, low, resonant, vibrating my chest cavity. It wasn't quite a growl, not quite a roar, nothing I could attribute to any animal native to these woods. "What the hell was that?" Collins whispered, unholstering his sidearm. "I'm not sure," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "But everyone stays together from here on out. No wandering, no separating for any reason." Martinez, the youngest of our rangers, pointed shakily to our right. "The shadows. They're moving." I looked where he pointed. Through gaps in the fog, I could make out our shadows cast against a rock face. Except they weren't moving in sync with us. Martinez's shadow raised an arm while the real Martinez stood frozen. Collins's shadow seemed to turn its head at an impossible angle. "It's hunting us," Sarah moaned, still rocking. "It's playing with us now." "There's a clearing up ahead," I said, desperate to reach a more defensible position. "We can regroup there." Through the curtain of fog, I could just make out an open space about 50 yards ahead. The mist was thinner there, allowing weak sunlight to penetrate. "Everyone move, now." I kept my voice authoritative even though I was scared. "Stay close." We advanced toward the clearing, the unnatural growl reverberating around us again. Brian was hyperventilating, his breath coming in short, desperate gasps. Sarah continued her chanting, clutching her amulet so tightly her knuckles had turned white. With each step toward the clearing, the fog seemed to thicken around us, as if trying to herd us in that direction. Every instinct screamed that we were walking into a trap, but our options were limited. At least in the clearing, we'd have better visibility, room to maneuver. As we neared the tree line, the fog parted just enough to reveal what waited for us. I raised my hand, signaling everyone to stop. Through the swirling mist, I could see into the clearing ahead, and what I saw there destroyed any remaining hope that we were dealing with something natural or explicable. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. The fog cleared, revealing something terrible I never thought I'd see. I stumbled to a halt at the edge of the clearing, my brain trying to reject what I was seeing. Jason Miller hung from a massive oak tree, or rather, what remained of him did. His limbs were scattered across the branches, twisted at impossible angles yet still moving and twitching. I was shocked when I realized those severed parts were still moving. "Jesus Christ," Collins whispered behind me, his voice barely audible. I looked upward at the horrible sight. Jason's head sat between two large branches facing us directly. His eyes were open and blinking. His mouth moved silently, gasping for air he couldn't possibly breathe. I reached for my radio, fingers numb with shock. We needed backup, evacuation, whatever the protocol was for. My mind faltered, for whatever this was. Before I could press the transmit button, Jason's mouth began to stretch. Not open, stretch. The jaw dislocated with a wet popping sound, then continued expanding beyond any human capacity. His face contorted, skin pulling tight until it split at the corners of his mouth. Something moved inside that impossible opening. Something massive. A snake-like thing slithered out, wet with blood and something darker. As it emerged, it kept coming. Far more mass than could have possibly fit inside a human head. The creature hung in the air, ignoring gravity. Its face contained warped, distorted human features that seemed collected from multiple sources. Too many eyes stared at us, arranged unevenly across what might have been a forehead. Its jaw opened to show rows of clear, needle-like teeth that moved independently, like waving fingers. Ramirez broke first. "Fuck this! Run!" He bolted back toward the forest, Collins right behind him, both screaming as they crashed through the underbrush. I couldn't move. My feet felt stuck to the ground as the creature's body continued to pour from Jason's ruined head. It grew larger with each passing second, its skin changing between oily black and blood red, depending on how the weak sunlight hit it. "Ah," it spoke, the sound coming not from its mouth but from everywhere at once, inside my head, from the trees, and from the ground beneath my feet. "The audience has arrived." Brian collapsed to his knees beside me, his breathing shallow and rapid. Sarah continued her desperate chanting, the words now tumbling out in a panicked stream. The creature's attention fixed on them. The presumptuous one's return. Its voice carried an amused tone that made my skin crawl. "Did you enjoy the show? I prepared it especially for you." "Please," Sarah whimpered, abandoning her chant. "We didn't mean—" "Your fear called to me," the creature interrupted, moving closer in a motion that wasn't quite slithering, wasn't quite floating. "Your first attempt was to calm, but this time your friend's terror was delicious." I managed to speak somehow, though it came out as a croak. "What are you—" Multiple eyes turned toward me and I immediately regretted speaking. Its attention felt like ice water injected directly into my veins. "The ranger asks questions," it said, sounding almost pleased. "How refreshing. Most humans only scream at this point." It drifted back toward the remains of Jason, touching a severed arm with what looked like affection. I've been feeding on this one's fear for hours. His mind was still aware, you see. I kept him conscious through all of it. The creature's body rippled with pleasure at the memory. But now he's nearly empty, and I require a new host. The thing moved with sudden, explosive speed. One moment it hovered near the tree. The next, it had wrapped around Sarah's body, squeezing with terrible force. She didn't even have time to scream before we heard the sickening sounds of bones snapping. Blood poured from her mouth as the creature tightened its grip, her eyes bulging with silent agony. The pendant she'd clutched so desperately fell to the ground as her arms went limp. The creature seemed to absorb her somehow, its mass expanding as her body collapsed inward. When it released her, what fell to the ground was barely recognizable as human, a crumpled, empty husk like a discarded wrapper. The demon, now twice its original size, turned toward Brian and me. Its mouth stretched into what might have been a smile, if smiles contained hundreds of moving teeth. "Run, little morsels," it purred. "Fear makes the hunt sweeter." I watched, unable to move, as the remaining ranger, Martinez, who'd stayed behind when the others fled, pulled his service weapon and fired directly at the creature. The bullets passed through its body like it was made of smoke, leaving brief hollow tunnels that immediately closed behind them. The creature laughed, a sound like screaming and sobbing combined. It surged toward Martinez, who kept firing until his gun clicked empty. Then it simply passed through him, like a wave of black oil. Martinez stood motionless for a moment, then dropped to his knees, eyes rolling back in his head before he collapsed face first into the dirt. Survival instinct finally broke through my paralysis. I grabbed Brian's arm, he seemed completely out of it, and yanked him to his feet. "Move!" I shouted, pulling him toward the forest in the opposite direction from where the other rangers had fled. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping across my face. Behind us, that terrible laughter followed through the trees. Brian stumbled alongside me, his movements mechanical and his eyes unfocused. The forest itself seemed to turn against us. Branches blocked our path. Roots rose up to trip our feet. The fog closed in again, confusing me despite my ranger's knowledge of these woods. "It can't leave the canyon," Brian muttered suddenly as we ran. "The book said it's bound to the place." I didn't waste breath answering him. Instead, I focused on the terrain, trying to navigate us upward, out of the ravine, and away from Devil's Canyon. If Brian was right, we just needed to reach the ridge. Something massive moved through the trees behind us, snapping trunks like twigs. The laughter grew louder, mixed with a sing-song voice. "I smell your fear, Ranger. It's exquisite." I pulled Brian harder, forcing him to match my pace as we scrambled up an increasingly steep slope. My lungs burned. My legs ached. But pure terror kept me moving, dragging Brian's half-conscious form beside me. We burst through a thicket onto a game trail I recognized. The ridge wasn't far now, maybe a quarter-mile of steep climbing. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, marked by that terrible, mocking laughter. "We're almost out!" I gasped to Brian, though I wasn't sure he could hear me through whatever mental breakdown he was experiencing. "Just keep moving." The demon's voice came again, closer now. "Your terror tastes different, Ranger. Not like the others. There's something sweeter about it. Something I want to savor slowly." I refused to look back, hauling Brian up the trail as roots and rocks seemed to move under our feet, trying to send us tumbling back down into the canyon. My hand closed around my flashlight, the only weapon I had left, though I knew it would be useless against what chased us. One thought kept me moving forward. Get to the ridge, get out of the canyon, get back to the station, and pray that whatever this thing was, it really couldn't follow. My legs burned with each desperate stride up the final stretch of the ridge. Brian stumbled beside me, his movements mechanical and his eyes vacant. The howls behind us grew fainter as we crested the hill, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't. "Keep moving," I gasped, yanking Brian's arm when he started to lag. "We're almost out." The tree line finally broke, revealing the maintenance road that would lead us back to the station. My truck sat in the distance, A small green dot in the ranger station's parking lot. It might as well have been miles away. Brian collapsed to his knees, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I grabbed his shirt collar and hauled him back up. We're not stopping. Not here. I pushed him forward, scanning the forest edge behind us. The fog had dissipated at this elevation, but that didn't mean we were safe. That thing, Nixathoth, could still be following. We half ran, half stumbled down the maintenance road, rocks sliding under our boots. Brian kept muttering something under his breath, the same phrase over and over, but I couldn't make it out. His eyes darted around wildly, seeing things I couldn't. When we reached the parking lot, I shoved Brian toward my truck while fumbling for my keys. My hands shook so badly I dropped them twice before managing to unlock the doors. "Get in," I ordered, practically throwing him into the passenger seat. As I climbed behind the wheel, a sound came from the direction of Devil's Canyon, a long, undulating howl that was neither wolf nor mountain lion. It held notes that no natural creature could produce, vibrating at frequencies that made my teeth ache. Brian covered his ears. "It wants me next," he whispered, the first coherent thing he'd said since we fled. "It's coming for me next." I jammed the key into the ignition and gunned the engine, tires spinning on gravel before finding purchase. We fishtailed out of the lot and onto the park access road, the ranger station rapidly shrinking in my rearview mirror. "Where are we going?" Brian asked, his voice hollow. "Sheriff's office, then the hospital." I gripped the steering wheel hard enough that my knuckles turned white. "We need to report what happened." Brian's head snapped toward me. "Report what? That we summoned a demon that killed Jason and Sarah? That we watched it fold Sarah like a fucking origami swan?" A hysterical laugh bubbled out of him. "They'll lock us up in the psych ward." He wasn't wrong. I pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing my truck well beyond the speed limit as we wound down the mountain road. Soon it would be dark. The thought made my stomach clench. "We'll tell them what happened to Jason and Sarah," I said finally. "Just not how it happened." Brain laughed again, that same broken sound. "What, a bear attack? A mountain lion?" He pressed his forehead against the passenger window. "You saw what it did to them?" I had. The images flashed in my mind. Jason's dismembered parts arranged in that disturbing display. Sarah's body collapsed in on itself like a crushed soda can. The sight of that thing emerging from Jason's stretched mouth. How it moved through Martinez like he was made of mist. "Animal attack," I said firmly, more to convince myself than Brian. "Unidentified predator, it's all we can say." For the rest of the drive, Brian alternated between catatonic silence and muttering, "It wants me next," while rocking slightly in his seat. Every few minutes, I checked the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that oily black shape slithering down the road behind us. But there was nothing, just empty asphalt disappearing into the gathering darkness. When we reached the sheriff's office, Deputy Garcia took one look at our blood-spattered clothes and wild eyes and immediately called for backup. Within an hour, the small office was packed with emergency personnel, paramedics, additional deputies, and even the county medical examiner. I sat in a hard plastic chair, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders, even though the room was warm, and told a version of the truth. We'd gone looking for Jason Miller, found evidence of a violent attack. Sarah Thompson was killed before our eyes. Rangers Collins and Ramirez had fled in one direction, Martinez in another. I didn't know if they'd made it out. "What kind of animal are we talking about here?" Sheriff Denton asked, his weathered face grave. I met his eyes steadily. "I've never seen anything like it. Maybe a grizzly, but bigger." "Grizzlies haven't been confirmed in this county for decades," he noted. "I know what I saw," I replied, the lie bitter on my tongue. The sheriff studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We'll send search and rescue for your rangers at first light. In the meantime, I want you both checked out at the hospital." They separated us then. Brian was taken to the county hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. I was released after a cursory exam confirmed I had no serious injuries. just cuts, bruises, and what the paramedic called acute stress reaction. By the time I returned to my cabin near the park, it was past midnight. I double-locked the door, something I'd never bothered with before, and checked every room, closet, and cabinet before collapsing on my couch, still fully dressed. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion eventually dragged me under. In my dreams, I heard it laughing. The aftermath unfolded with surreal efficiency. Collins and Ramirez had made it out, hiking all night to reach the nearest town. Martinez's body was recovered from the clearing, officially declared dead from shock and blood loss due to traumatic injuries. The search party found what remained of Sarah and Jason, though they had to be identified by dental records. The official report, released 3 days later, attributed the deaths to an unidentified predator, possibly ursine. The rangers who'd witnessed what actually happened stuck to the script. None of us mentioned the impossible physics of the mutilations, the fog that moved against the wind, or the thing with too many eyes that spoke inside our heads. Some lies are necessary, some truths are too dangerous. I visited Brian once at the hospital. He sat in a chair by the window, staring at nothing, arms wrapped tight around himself. The doctors had diagnosed him with acute psychosis triggered by trauma. They'd sedated him heavily after he'd tried to claw the skin off his own face, claiming he could feel it moving under there, waiting to get out. "Brian," I said, sitting across from him, "you need to stay here. Don't go back to the park." His eyes moved to my face, recognition flickering briefly. "It knows where I am," he whispered. "It's in my head now, showing me things." I leaned closer. "What things?" "How it's going to take me apart." A single tear tracked down his cheek. "Piece by piece. It keeps playing it like a movie, over and over." I left the hospital with a hollow feeling in my chest. There was nothing I could do for him except keep my distance. Whatever had happened in that canyon, Brian and Sarah had invited it. They'd performed the ritual that brought it here. If that thing wanted Brian, my presence would only endanger more people. 3 days after my visit, I got the call. Brian's rental car had been found abandoned at the park entrance. Against medical advice, he'd checked himself out of the hospital and disappeared. We organized a search party immediately, but I already knew where we'd find him. The next morning, we discovered his body in the same clearing where we'd first encountered the demon. He'd been mutilated in exactly the same way as Jason, limbs arranged in impossible patterns across the old oak tree, but with one difference. His head was completely missing. We searched for hours but never found it. That afternoon, I submitted my request for indefinite leave. My supervisor didn't even question it. He'd seen the photos, talked to the other rangers. Whatever story we'd agreed upon, he knew there was more to it. Some things don't need to be spoken to be understood. Before I left Pine Ridge for good, I made 2 final stops. First, the cartography office, where I removed every reference to Devil's Canyon from park maps. Then the maintenance shed, where I gathered danger, no entry signs, and spent my last day hammering them into the ground around the canyon perimeter. Small protections against a force I barely understood, but it was all I could do. I packed what I could fit in my truck and drove east, putting as much distance between myself and Pine Ridge as possible. I ended up in a small coastal town called Harbor Point, 3 states away. Found a job as a private boat tour guide. No woods, no hiking trails, just open water and salt air. I rented a small apartment overlooking the harbor and tried to rebuild something resembling a normal life. For a while, it seemed to work. The nightmares came less frequently. I could go days without flinching at unexpected shadows or the sound of branches scratching against windows. I started to believe that whatever had happened at Devil's Canyon had stayed there, bound to that place as Brian had claimed. Then the texts started. The first one arrived exactly 6 weeks after I'd settled in Harbor Point. "Nice view from your window tonight. Moon reflects beautifully on that blue coffee mug you leave on the sill." I hadn't given my new number to anyone from Pine Ridge. The coffee mug, a chipped ceramic thing I'd picked up at a local shop, sat exactly where the text described. I spent that night in a motel, door blocked with a chair. More messages followed. Details of my dinner the night before, the title of a book I'd been reading, observations about conversations I'd had with customers on boat tours. The old couple today, married 50 years. Remember when the woman said death will be an adventure? I agree. I changed my number, moved apartments. The texts followed. Last night, I woke at 3:17 a.m. to my phone buzzing on the nightstand. The message contained just 5 words. Distance is an illusion, Ranger. I lay awake until dawn, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the waves crash against the shore outside my window. As the first gray light filtered through the blinds, a terrible understanding settled over me. It was never confined to the canyon. It had let us believe that, let us run, let us think we'd escaped. The Rangers, the sheriff's department, even me. We were all just pieces in its game. It could have taken any of us at any time. But it was patient. It enjoyed fear more when it was prolonged and savored. It had let me flee across 3 states, build a new life, and start to feel safe again. The ultimate predator. My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but my hand moved of its own accord, lifting the device. Ready for our reunion? I've been practicing with your friends. Attached was a photo. Collins, his body contorted into something no longer recognizable as human. His eyes, still intact, still aware, stared directly into the camera. I set the phone down carefully, walked to the window and looked out at the ocean stretching to the horizon. Somewhere behind me, I heard something move, a subtle movement of weight on floorboards that should have been empty. The thing about horror stories is that they're supposed to end. The monster is defeated, or the survivors escape, or at least the book closes with the terror contained. But I understand now that what happened at Devil's Canyon wasn't the story. It was just the first chapter,